Dear friends, thank you for supporting this channel on Patreon to join our growing family of donors, now 59 patrons strong. And remember, once we reach 100 active patrons, we will start sending out a 1-ounce U.S. Silver Eagle, autographed by your host, Dunagun Kaiser, to one active supporter each and every month. Thanks for taking a minute to pitch in by going to patreon.com/ReluctantPreppers and pledging your support today. Thanks very much.
Hey Reluctant Preppers, this is showing you just how easy it is to purchase silver without paying any premium over spot price. You just go to sdbullion.com/RP, scroll down and enter the special code to get silver without any premium, and they'll mail it to your mailbox, discreetly packaged. Inside you'll find a beautiful 10-ounce bar of fine silver, and you are able to purchase that and have it and add it to your stack and your collection without paying any premium, and you're supporting Reluctant Preppers along the way. Thanks.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We're delighted to have a first-time visitor tonight. Josh Cunnings is the co-founder of BoogieBrew.net. He's a supplier of a remarkable product which is based on nature's wisdom on how to enhance the ability of your plant's root systems to obtain nutrition and how to grow vigorously, how to do it all naturally in a healthy way. He's here with us to talk about how his product and his approach can really open up options for people who want to garden in a small space and increase their yield and their produce. And we're just delighted to have you here. Josh, thanks for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers.
You're super welcome, Dunagun. I'm honored to join you in this call. And by the way, I think what you are doing is simply fantastic. And people that follow you are the future of our whole country. So, thank you for supporting Dunagun and his channel. I'm talking to you, his viewers.
I wanted to reach out to you on this because we've had Joel Salatin, a legendary permaculture farmer and also educator who speaks around the country at, Whole Foods types fairs, and has an internship program on his teaching farm there at the Polyface Farm in Shenandoah Valley and so on, because he talks about we have one of his interviews with us called Feed Your Family on 0 Acres, talking about how you can use high density vertical gardening approaches and that sort of thing. We also interviewed another fellow who has a greenhouse, and when he talked about the bounty that he's able to grow in that greenhouse, I couldn't help but ask him, because we live in a region that has very poor soil where we are, and I said, well, what's the soil like, Rennie? I was expecting him to say, oh, it's just rich and black and you wouldn't believe it. And he said, actually, it's just poor red clay. He says it's the worst soil you can imagine, but he says we water with compost tea. And that's the first time I'd ever heard of that. I had no idea what he's talking about, so I started searching a little bit on it, and he said, you really got to talk to Josh over at Boogie Brew. So here we are. We're asking, what in the world is compost tea? And I have to add a little joke here. It's not a joke, it's a true story. But when my wife, who has really been the gatekeeper of nutrition information and healthy alternative stuff into our home and bringing all that stuff in, the evangelist to me, said when she was pregnant with our 4th and 5th child, she said, we're going to learn all about nutrition, and I'm going to make these herbal teas for myself. And she did. We have an entire set of cupboards in our kitchen that are filled with all kinds of herbs that she makes these, and she uses cheesecloth bags to make these big bundles of herbal teas by the gallon, and our daughters would tease her about it and everything. But so I was very familiar, maybe more than most people are, with a wide range of healthy herbal teas. But when I heard about Boogie Brew tea, I think we're talking about something completely different here. So can you help us out? How is this going to help your planting life, and maybe how you got into it as well?
Yeah, well, hats off to her for providing an apothecary in your own kitchen. And she's an example to the rest of the country, instead of just, in sheeple fashion, running to a doctor to be prescribed usually something poisonous, and then run down to a drugstore and pay for that poison. That's wonderful that she's doing that. And health is our only wealth. herbal teas, our creator gave us something usually to heal ourselves. The book, Patient, Heal Thyself. So I'm very pleased that you have a wife like that. And I want to come back in my next life as one of your kids and be one of the lucky people that gets raised by responsible preppers. A responsible prepper, that's the best dad and mom I could ever dream of. Most kids are being raised on a diet of, pure poison for foods, and then mentally, and emotionally, they're filling their lives with video games and usually crappy social media. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I'm diverting here. You asked me about the tea. Yeah, Boogie Brew tea is for soil. It was found through necessity by me after 14 years of being a cannabis grower up here in Northern California. About 10 years into it, I finally got sick of running off to the grocery store and buying X bottle of this and B bottle of that. Unfortunately, I'm ashamed to say that yours truly, Josh the Boogie Boy himself, started out with chemicals. I didn't know any better. I started out with hydroponics, which, hydro has its place. It's a valid form of horticulture, except you're dealing with substances made from oil and gas. It took me a long time to figure that out. And the tea makes it just foolproof. I mean, you can take any soil, a crappy soil like your buddy that you mentioned that, gave the shout out to Boogie Brew that had the clay soil, and really bring that to life with a living microbial extract, a microbial broth, a soil soup that's usually most easily obtained from an AACT, an actively aerated compost tea. Now, back before the word prepper existed, way back, compost tea was considered just raw compost, straight out of a compost pile, steeped in water without the use of an air pump, without, a goldfish aquarium, an aquarium pump to aerate it. And so there's two versions of compost tea. There's the anaerobic extract, where you just take, like you would do with an herbal tea, where you just take some compost and steep it in water. And that kind of compost tea should be steeped for as long as possible and let it go through kind of a anaerobic ferment, a stinky, fermentation. But who's got time to do all that? If you take an air pump, take some fresh compost, some worm castings. Worms produce such good biology out of their asses. Some really good stuff coming out of the poop of worms. Okay. A good prepper should have a worm bin first, even before a compost tea brewer, I mean, those little suckers, they're the life. They'll go into that crappy clay soil and they'll loosen it up as well. But that's what compost tea, a living aerobically activated compost tea, will really do. It's like yoga. It will get in there and loosen up a heavy clay soil, or conversely add structure, create a microbial matrix, if you will, to a loose sandy soil. And it's like cheating. With the poorer the soil, the more first aid remedy, that a soil needs, the quicker compost tea, AACT, actively aerated compost tea, can come to the rescue and provide a magical Band-Aid and bring even a low par soil to life and make it really perform like a high-grade soil. So how did I come to it? I came to it from getting sick of buying all these different, eventually it became organics, but still liquid products out of plastic jugs, far from cost effective. I finally read a book called Teeming with Microbes. I'm sure a lot of your listeners, your viewers have heard of this book. It's the classic Bible of compost tea book. Jeff Lovenfels and the co-author whose name escapes me. Brilliant, brilliant book. Simple, breaking it down, making the information digestible and easy to consume, like you do. And after reading it, it's like a light bulb went off in my head, and I decided, instead of buying any more liquid organic products with, guano powders and water, that I would just do my own compost tea recipes and fine-tune them a bit for growing cannabis. That is, adding extra back guano powder into the bloom cycle. And it all made sense. It just kind of clicked. So if you read that book, get a feel and a grasp for how compost tea works in a soil substrate, the mechanisms that the compost tea exerts to allow a soil system to really work in your favor, or more correctly, in your plant's favor. It's just wonderful. AACTs are a fabulous way to farm, truly, not just for cannabis.
Before we move on, I wanted to give the credit to, it was Daniel Smith, the founder of Go for Green Living YouTube channel, who joined us in talking about his poor red clay soil, from which he has a 100-foot greenhouse that can feed 25 people because of all the vegetables he can grow out of that, together with his tilapia in the symbiotic cultures.
Okay, I do remember Daniel. And I remember when he was talking about getting this Go for Green Living channel going. So I'm really proud to hear that he's gotten it off and running, and that and also that he in turn brought you full circle back to me. That's epic.
And I'm thinking about my dad too, because when we moved from Arizona to Minnesota when I was 7 years old and started growing this big backyard garden, we went out there, and my dad said he got permission from my mom to basically take over the backyard and turn it all into a garden pretty much. And he said, okay, we got to start turning over this soil. So he showed me how to jump on the spade and get it down there and flip about a foot deep of soil over. And he just was transfixed because the soil was so black and loamy. And he said, oh, this is the best soil. Oh, I've never had soil like this before to work with. But even so, we started a compost pit there. We'd throw our tea bags and apple cores and all kinds of stuff out back and turn it over with a pitchfork and all these things. And eventually he just kept taking that farther and farther, to where in his retirement years he had multiple very large compost, I don't even know what to call them. They were like cubes out in the back where he would combine all kinds of things. He had the big long thermometers in there to make sure the temperature was rising, and he talked about it. And he always told me, this stuck with me my whole life. He said, always leave the soil better than you found it. Always be developing the soil. And the idea being that there's so much more to understand about the complexity of that ecosystem, that hidden ecosystem that's under the ground, at the root, not just the roots, but the rootlets, the little tiny things. So can you talk to us just for a few minutes about what's so critical about the environment that the rootlets of plants find themselves in, for them to be able to thrive and to really produce a bountiful harvest?
Well, it's like it'd be like the placenta, when we're babies. I mean, it just provides a womb-like environment for all these processes, which you correctly just stated. It's a mystery, I mean, even you could interview the top 1% of soil scientists, the smartest soil scientists on Earth, and they in turn, they only know 1% of what's really going on in that complex, placenta type system. And most of the biology is right there in the topsoil, where the roots come out, and they put out their own message systems, their own exudates, and that in turn attracts responding mechanisms, whether it's from fungal hyphae that are growing, in a healthy soil substrate, like in a redwood forest. And all these critical messages are being carried back and forth. I mean, they've proven it, that even in a multiple tens of thousands of acres of continuous redwood forest, that these messages are being sent from miles across one side of the forest floor, all the way across thousands of acres to another side. And critical, moisture, of course, is being carried, as well as all kinds of substances that we'll never understand in our lifetime. And we as Americans, we used to have like that Minnesota soil everywhere, that black, rich goodness. And we've ruined it. In 80 years of carbon-based farming, and by carbon I don't mean biochar, natural soil carbon. Right. I mean, carbon fossil fuel-based farming techniques. And now we've wiped out what was previously, most of the Midwest, and the East Coast for sure was just such a rich biome of living soil. And now, in order for farmers to have a rich soil, they have to, go out and buy expensive compost and buy Boogie Brew compost teas and add all these inputs and try and recreate what we took for granted until very recently, and that we've just trampled all over, since the 30s, since the 40s. That's really when suburbia took off. And the thing is, Dunagun, in the 30s, all of us were preppers. Anyone born into, especially the Great Depression, there wasn't a child that didn't know how to plant a potato in the ground. You didn't have to be born to a Dunagun and his super wife, the prepper parents, everybody just naturally had that instinct to preserve what was there. And your father taught you such profound wisdom to leave a soil even better than you found it, rather than the opposite, which is what we've done as a society, embracing these absurd mechanized systems and these monocrops that, where in nature do you see just one crop, one particular thing just growing by itself and to the exclusion of everything else? And even worse, using chemical herbicides and using a genetically modified version of this plant to resist those chemical herbicides.
Yeah, I have to jump in because it is, when we learned that, but you go back about 50 years ago, and in the era you're describing, and that farmer was, of all the, OSHA has kept track of life expectancies and risk levels of different careers for many, many decades, and farmer used to be, it was very interesting because there were some physical hazards, lacerations or pinches or crushed or whatever, because they use heavy machinery, but they still had one of the longest life expectancies of any profession, and chemists was the shortest life expectancy of any professional chemist. But now, over 50 years, now the farmer's life expectancy is no longer any better than the chemist. In fact, it matches the chemist closer than to any other. And and if that's happening to the people who are growing this stuff, the second little anecdote, our doula, one of our live-in hired helper who came and helped us when we had a couple of home births with our last of our 5th kids, said that her husband, who worked at the produce department at a natural foods co-op, would only handle, he had to wear gloves when he was going to handle the non-organic bananas, because otherwise he'd break out in a rash on his hands. And there was a zookeeper who said that the animals would pick out and throw away. They could tell the difference. They'd throw away the non-organic bananas, but they would eat the organic ones. And then you got me to one last thing. We take walks frequently with our dogs here, and we have to pass some farm fields to get down to a river area where we like to walk to. And we were down there, and we heard this big sound. I looked up the hill, and there was a huge farm machine with big tanks on it. And it looked like, looked like something out of the Transformers, and it was spreading out its wings. It had these huge wings that were starting to unfold and unfold and unfold, and I realized this was a spraying machine. It was about to start spraying the farm, and my wife has chemical sensitivity, so I bolted towards the guy, hollering and trying to get his attention to say, let us get out of here before you start your spraying. So I finally got his attention. Thank goodness he had to get out of the cab to go fix one of those wings that wouldn't extend properly or something. And this thing, by that time it looked kind of like Buzz Lightyear with its wings extended. And I said to the guy, hey, we've got chemical sensitivities. Can you let us get out of here before you start spraying? And he looked back just bewildered. He said, This isn't chemicals. This is just fertilizer. I said, we got to go. So luckily we got out of there.
Fertilizer, just some ammonia nitrate.
Yeah. So anyway, I just had to jump in and add that. But thank you. You were on a roll, and you were telling us, you were getting closer to telling us about, I think, what Boogie Brew can do to give the plants the chance that they need to be able to produce well for people who have, regardless of what type of soil they have.
Yeah, I mean, it's like me, I'm insecure. I talk too much. I want everyone to like me. And I did the same with my tea. I tried almost too hard to make it a super high octane, veganic, so it's vegan and organic, all natural recipe with 18 ingredients. The truth is, any good prepper worth their salt can, sure, try out Boogie Brew. If you've never brewed tea before, you did stumble on the right guest on Dunagun's channel, to introduce you to the world of brewing teas. But if they're a sharp prepper, they'll actually go out and read the book, Teaming with Microbes, and research compost tea recipes and just start making your own. Find some local castings. If you already produce them, even better. Find some local compost. If you already produce that, even better. And find someone in your neighborhood or on your local Craigslist. Find a like-minded prepper who maybe produces too much of their own killer compost and wants to sell some. You can add some basic catalyst ingredients to ideally a wood chip compost and worm casting. That would be your sort of two primary basil, base, I mean, not the herb basil.
Understand.
Basil ingredients. And that would be some molasses, because sugars stimulate the microbes, and some kelp. You can just find some hopefully non-Fukushima irradiated kelp. Now, isn't it sad that the greatest treasure, the greatest resource in the world, our own oceans that we all come from, have become the world's chemical toilet bowl, plasticized toilet bowl, and radioactive dumping ground? Yeah. So having, some clean North Atlantic kelp, to my knowledge, that's still pretty good, clean stuff. And it's just a great, very modest quantity. You can get as little as 5% of your compost tea recipe could have some kelp. I mean, the kelp extract is always more potent than the kelp powder. But if you're lucky enough to live near the beach, they usually let you take a little bit of kelp that's washed up on shore. Different regulations by county and state. But anyway, that's good stuff. And just add it to some compost and worm castings and brew it with a high-powered air pump. More air than is needed in 5-gallon fish tank to keep some goldfish alive. A killer, a rich compost tea recipe demands lots of air. 1 liter of air for every liter of tea that you're brewing. So we do an IBM business model on our brew kits. A lot of our new customers, they've never brewed compost tea before. They want to get into it. And so we reward them for finding Boogie Brew by giving them a killer deal on a one-stop shop brew kit that comes with a high-powered air pump that will do 45 liters a minute. That's up to 10 gallons of full-strength compost tea, and then the air stones and the tubing. And then some extra goodies, additives, and also some worm castings so they can make a cheaper tea. The last thing we want is people feeling like they're slaves to Boogie. Money is like manure. Spread it around in the right places. I'm glad Dunagun's introducing. I'm really glad that the preppers are meeting the Boogie Boy on Dunagun's channel. But honestly, money and knowledge too. Knowledge like your father gave you. That's way more powerful currency than money. And I mean, obviously your son discovered this before he was even a teenager. So, and that's what you're giving to the world, and what your followers, you're his channel, which consists of the preppers out there, are giving to the world, is the gift of knowledge and how to not do what we've all been programmed to do for the last 80 years, which is live this typical supermarket lifestyle, this suburbia madness. Throw away the plastic shopping bags. Put a raised bed in the driveway where an SUV once stood. If you have a piece of suburbia that has a swimming pool, convert it to aquaponics or another super bed, an orchard bed, whatever, Keep being preppers and keep teaching your neighbors to be preppers. You're not the crazy ones. I hear people, those preppers, that's just, they're doomsdayish. They're not doomsdayish. We've set ourselves up for doomsday. If anyone's paying attention to the news, which I know is a bunch of mainstream crap, but there are some good stuff. I mean, the doomsday clock. Yeah. They're setting it to it's never been this close since the highest point of the Cold War. And what's pushing it closer to midnight is not the nuclear threat, which day to day varies, depending on our president and Korea's mood. It's this whole climate change, which again you may or may not agree with whether it's happening or look. Some big things are happening, and the preppers are the ones who see the light growing dimmer at the end of the tunnel. And so you're building your own tunnels and illuminating with your own light, and hopefully shedding that light of knowledge onto everyone else. Because if I honestly believe, Dunagun, that if anybody can change our society and rebuild suburbia one agri-hood at a time, it's your movement. It's the preppers. It's the GYGers. It's absolutely your movement. And it's all we've got left. Nothing else matters. Nothing else matters except saving us from ourselves. SOS. And the preppers are more equipped, whether it's like your wife with her apothecary, her cupboard, like, oh, isn't that odd? She keeps every medicine that we could possibly use from what our creator gave us.
Right.
That's is that extreme?
Oh, we lost you. I'm going to have to call you back. Hold on one second.
Yeah, take your time.
You're good. Okay, you're good. You're locked up for about 5 seconds, but you're back now.
I was saying that. Sorry, I lost you there. The digital gremlins are trying to get between DK and the Boogie Boy. But I was saying, that it's not extreme at all for your wife to stock a whole apothecary's worth of herbal tea remedies in your house. It's what everybody should be doing instead of running off to the pharmacy, instead of running to Target, running to CVS. The preppers, thank you for being who you are. And for God's sakes, keep doing it and spreading the word, the knowledge, which is a much more critical currency than this paper stuff we call money that's getting more and more worthless every day.
Taking it to the next step of actionable baby steps that people can start. If they want to just take the first step, let's say people have either they already have a garden, or they'd like to start doing some vertical gardening in pots or something on it if they have a very limited space. And you've explained that a compost tea, and you've given us some hints as to how people can either put their own ingredients together, or they can obtain the kit from you to help give them a real head start at that. Can be used. How do you then use that in combination with your gardening? Where does that enter into? Do you use that instead of every time you water, or do you use it just to treat the soil before you plant, or how does that exactly get used in your growing of vegetables, for example?
Well, so you are primarily feeding the soil, but people ask me all the time, well, should I use compost tea in the off season, which for a lot of the country, it's March, but we're still having record winter, we're having all kinds of winter weather. Yes and no. I would advise waiting on Boogie Brew. And how often to use it? As little as twice a month. Every week is ideal. And go for that alternating recipe. When I said yes and no to prepping your soil first before you put the vegetables in, do it with the cheaper tea recipe. Don't waste your valuable boogie dollars on just feeding the soil if it's still a few weeks out from getting the plants in there. Now, once you get plants in there and you have those roots going out and spreading their magic, they're acting as receptacles for all the goodies, all the microbiological warriors that are in the Boogie Brew recipe, and they're going to create that exchange, that relationship that no one can really describe exactly how it works, but it's just a wonderful thing when it does work, and it works really well with the tea. So a typical program I would advise doing, you can use the high-octane formula that's in Boogie Brew on 1 week, and then alternate with a cheaper, more basic warm casting and compost tea the next week, and then go back to Boogie on week 3 and so on. And doing it weekly, it's like cheating. I mean, it's really, really effective when you do it weekly. It's more important about what you don't do in between. Don't use chlorinated water. Don't overwater. Don't over-fertilize, even with organics. Ask your plants what they need before you go scratching in extra bat guano powders. If you're in containers, that's great because you can be more focused with what you're feeding your plants. Instead of having to shop for some bulk soil and compost maybe delivered to you, by a local business to fill up umpteen raised beds, you can go for a high-grade packaged soil like Ocean and Forest from Fox Farm, or out here we have the 420 blend. But there's a lot of good soils depending on where you are in the country. But at least shop locally. In just about every county has some soil devotees, soil creating devotees that will advertise themselves depending on the time of year and if they have soil available on their local Craigslist, on your ag boards. So be a prepper. Go and meet with other would-be like prep. Weave your way into the social fabric of your local ag community. Don't be afraid to ask the local people that you bump into, whether it's through the Gardener Society or a guild, or community farms, there's community farms everywhere, or just ask the people point blank who advertise their compost and their soil on your local Craigslist. You know, what I'm looking for the vitamin amore, the vitamin love. You know, tell me how you make this stuff. Who's got a good tip on a good local soil? The soil is still the main horsepower. It's still the main engine. A compost tea is nothing more than a high octane fuel additive, for lack of better terminology or analogy, to that greater soil engine. So pay close attention. I know you have the gentleman who referred me to you with the crummy clay-based soil, but try and get yourself on a stronger foothold to begin with than that. And again, this comes to the core of the prepper movement and where we as a society need to head, which is that instead of another 7-Eleven, instead of another Kentucky Fried Chicken, instead of another convenience store or fast food restaurant in the hood, we need the preppers to have community compost piles, community worm farms. These things will, in the next 2 decades, I'm convinced of it, Dunagun, start to appear in neighborhoods more and more. People are getting it, the value of a quality soil, of having a good soil. Soil's everything. If you don't have, you can have all the hunting rifles in the world. You can have water filtration systems up the wazoo, canning and storage, and all the herbal apothecary on, enough to last you and your family the rest of your life. But if you don't have a good soil to farm out of, oh man, that's as bad as not having seeds.
The phrase comes to my mind, where's the life going to come from? Like you said, you can have the hunting rifles and you can have the water filtration and you can have the protection, you can have all that, but where's the life going to come from? Yep. It's
going to come from your topsoil that you lovingly tend to in your backyard, and that you try. It takes real effort, and like we need more stress in our lives and have to go out and hunt, for yet another product. But it's so important to get the best possible baseline, soil system going in your raised beds. Now, going back to talking about the little guy with their super biointensive vertical shelving and their pots, they actually have more affordability, more luxury, in that they're not trying to fill, with as much bulk, so they can afford to spend a bit more and buy something a bit better than just the really crappy soil that's being sold out of a plastic bag at their local Home Depot. Cannabis has become legal or medically legal, somewhere close to legal, in more than half our country. And so in more than half our country, there are now grow stores. And the grow stores sell you a bunch of crap, a bunch of liquid chemical garbage products that's straight out of a catalog. But guess what they also sell? They sell pallets and pallets and pallets of really good soil for the sensible growers who, no matter what, will always beat a path to their door. And the mantra that as a store owner, as a business owner, you have to give your customers what they want. And there's always going to be those sensible cannabis growers, those intelligent 420 heads who say, hey, I want some good soil. And so when a business, when a nursery, when a grow store or a hardware store sells a soil, they have to commit, to buying pallets of it from a distributor. That's the only way it's cost effective for them to then get you a bag of it into your hands between $10 and no more than hopefully $20 retail, depending on what part of the country. So there's almost a soil renaissance that's happened in the quality of soils that are available in packaged form if you look for them. And especially the best place to look is in the grow stores. And, some of the best knowledge that will put mind to shame on how to grow finer cannabis plants, and in turn, how to grow higher bricks level grapes or better sweet corn or tomatoes or 100 pounds of potatoes in a 4x4 and so on. It actually comes from the cannabis growing forums, the THC garden internet societies, the ganjafarmer.net. I can't remember their names, but there's a lot of them. It's where I used to go to a public library because I was paranoid back when I was a grower about doing it from my ISP address, and go and just research all of those forums. And there's a lot of good information, a lot of deep microbial intelligence on those cannabis grow forum boards.
If people want to get started in this, it sounds like you're saying that they can start with some decent soil and then enhance it with this compost tea. Just to give people some idea, what kind of ratio of harvest, whether it's pounds of vegetables per whatever that they would be growing, do you see? Should they expect a fractional increase, or is it even possible to get double the amount of harvest from if you weren't supplementing with a compost tea?
I've seen up to triple the yields in a first aid remedy situation where the soil was being strangled by a root-eating nematode on a pepper crop. This was in Petaluma at the Bounty Farm, a wonderful community farm on city land that was donated to the city from an old junkyard.
Oh dear.
So so and there's even, it's sad because there's one side of that whole farm where they can only grow decorative flowers because the soil has too much lead in it.
Yeah.
From all the old paint from all the old paint object, whatever, from paint, and just from junkyard stuff accumulating on that side. Unfortunately, when the junkyard ran itself as a junkyard, it was smart enough to have all the paints on one side, and so, that in that situation, it was very poor soil to begin with, and the tea came in and it strangled in turn the nematode. That's what a good compost tea will do. It will send out these the natural fungal good fungi that will wrap its hyphal threading, the fungal threading. This is in the book Teeming with Microbes, my favorite book, and it shows a picture of an otherwise evil root-eating nematode boring its way into the side, right through the main crown root, right through the main tap root, of this plant. And boom, the beneficial fungal hyphae from a compost tea threading itself around this nematode, this worm-shaped creature, and strangling it. So there's where a probiotic gets in your human gut, and it wards off, it defends your intestine from the bad guys, from the yeasty beasties, from the pathogens. And so a probiotic, it's the opposite of an antibiotic. It uses more life to take on the bad life forms that have colonized themselves in an unhealthy system, whether it's your soil or the human intestine. We're not what we eat, we're what we absorb in our guts. And it's the same with your soil. If you get in there and if you start feeding it a living, microbially rich, active recipe like Boogie Brew or a homemade compost tea, you're going to see dramatic results. I would say anywhere up to double or triple the yields. Now, if you're already a cracking good farmer, a brilliant soil prepper, you've put your biochar in there ahead of time, you've been like your dad, with the umpteen compost piles, and you've been measuring the temperature, the thermometer, and you're just, you're doing everything you can to enhance an already healthy garden system. Of course, you're not going to see as dramatic of a difference. You're still going to see a difference. There's no question about it. It's like the finishing touch almost. Compost tea on a regular basis will absolutely improve any farm. And let me tell your viewers, the preppers, the economics. The preppers are all into doing everything for less, right? Use less to create more. Part of prepperism is a extreme minimalistic outlook, not going off and buying the latest miracle because somebody sold you a song and a dance and says it works, So the economics of taking soil inputs and instead of just scratching them in dry, like worm castings, around the plants to get better results, which works. But the economics, the prepper, relationship comes in where instead of taking a cubic foot of worm castings and spreading that over maybe one 4x12 box, right? You take that cubic foot and you can make, oh my God, a cubic foot will make hundreds of gallons of worm tea, right? And that's then enough on a twice a month basis, as little as 20 gallons an acre, up to 50 gallons an acre, depending on what you're growing. Okay. If it's greens, 20 gallons an acre is enough for greens. And then for corn, peppers, cannabis, for hungry plants, go stronger. Go up to 50 gallons an acre, right? I mean, even on Boogie Brew, I mean, we do Boogie Brew deals all the time, like on the GYG page. You can get your costs down to like, $4 a gallon, full strength. Most people dilute it, 1 to 3, 1 to 4. Boogie's very, very active recipe. You don't need to use it full strength. So it ends up being pennies per plant, is my point. Okay. The cost of any input, if it's an organic input, if it's a living-based input, if it's compost that you've bought locally, or our ultra-high grade, California wood chip hummus or Boogie hummus, it's going to magnify its benefits and be more economically viable. It's just a more intelligent way to get worm castings, get the living stuff, building that life. The cheapest and most effective way is to brew it first. Brew, baby, brew. Brew it into a living compost tea first. And, of course, use chlorine-free water. The temperature should be, 68 to 72 degrees. I mean, we have the frequently asked questions, the do's and don'ts. One more tip. I'm sorry I'm all over the place here.
You're fine.
The brew. When you're brewing, when a prepper brews, and a good prepper doesn't just make a good brew, they then prep for the next brew, meaning bleed the air stones dry. Most people just use a good old-fashioned air stone, a pumice, air diffuser, like the kind they sell in fish. Now, that is a weak link in the compost tea brewing chain. And let me tell you why. Because those pumice cylinders, they're like a sponge. And deep within, they're going to harbor little pockets of moisture, like any good sponge will. So one of the secrets to being a good, consistent tea brewer is to bleed that air stone dry after you're done with the 24-hour brew cycle. So that means keep the air pump on, keep it going for a couple to anywhere from 2 to 4 additional hours, but remove the air stone from, of course, you're done with the tea. Once you made the tea, get it into the soil, infuse it, and use it before you lose it. But the air stone, keep running air through it raw with it unsubmerged for a good couple of hours after you're done brewing. That way, you're bleeding it dry, just like a sponge by the kitchen sink. If that sponge is dry, don't matter if there's still a bit of dirt particles in it from the previous dishwashing. If it's bone dry, if you're keeping it dry, it ain't going to harbor pathogens. Nothing can really colonize itself in there and then infect the next batch of compost tea you make, either a week out or 2 weeks out. The minimum schedule should be 2 tea feedings per month. Twice a month is enough to really see a marked and consistent difference when you brew teas. And it doesn't even have to be Boogie Brew. Even just 2 worm casting teas per month. It's so worth it for any prepper to jump into tea brewing if they can commit to doing it twice a month. With or without my over-the-top recipe, just a good compost tea formula. And remember, bleed those air stones dry and keep the container clean and dry. And the next time you brew, your tea is going to be awesome.
For people who do want to get more information quickly about your products that you offer, where can they find the details?
So everything's on our website. It's a bit like me. It's a long, rambling website. There's a ton of information on it. Fortunately, the kind of visitors who come to our site and the kind of preppers that are interested in compost tea, they are thirsty for more knowledge, more information. So more people than not thank me for, having as much stuff on there. BoogieBrew.net or BoogieBrew.com. They both go to the same site, BoogieBrew.net. Down at the bottom is the do's and don'ts PDF, the frequently asked questions, and the Boogie cheat sheet, which revolves around using my favorite applicator to get such probiotic goodness into your soil in the easiest way. Now, guess which favorite applicator that is, Dunagun? It's a 12. It's a $12. I know you're like, okay, what is it, Josh?
For turkey baster? I'm trying to think. My mind.
Yeah, well, no. The best way, okay, so brew it in a bucket. Now what do you do with it once it's in the bucket? I mean, you can dilute it with more water, 1 to 3, 1 to 4. The water should be chlorine-free, of course. Fortunately, most preppers are long past that. And you can apply it in through a watering can, or you can just spoon feed it, each plant. But the best way, the easiest way, I always go the easy way, right? The way that someone who enjoys cannabis always wants to do it the easy way. the lazy man's way is what I'm trying to politely say, is in one of those hose end sprayers that they sell at Home Depot for $12. Made the Ortho makes the best one. It's called the Dial-In Spray. How ironic that these evil chemical companies they want your garden to be addicted to their Miracle Grow, their Kool-Aid colored chemical crap, right? And they want you to do the opposite of what your dad taught you, which is just kill all the life in your soil, turn every living plant that's in that soil into almost like a heroin addict that needs now these chemicals just to keep itself alive, right? No, it's stripped of any immune system, stripped of that microbial matrix, stripped of all those goodies that come in and attack the bad guys, So anyway, one of those applicators that's designed for lawn chemicals. Ortho makes one, Hudson makes one. But I can't remember the names. The Ortho's the best, and it's sold at True Value, Ace Hardware, Lowe's, and indeed Home Depot for all of $12. Now, they tend to overly dilute the compost tea. The strongest setting you can do on one of those really handy Ortho hose end sprayers, or any of the hose end sprayers for that matter, the strongest dilute they'll do is 8 ounces a gallon, which would be really strong for those disgusting chemicals, right? But for compost tea, 8 ounces a gallon is only a 1:16 dilute.
Pretty weak. Okay.
So, yeah, that's kind of weak. We want to see people doing it at 1:5, 1:3, at least with our recipe, to really get those results. Not where you're feeling like Boogie Brew's trying to bully you into buying more tea, but where you're using enough of it at strong enough doses that you're really getting honest-to-goodness results. So in order for that to happen, through one of those super handy hose and spray devices, you'll need to make Boogie Brew at double to triple the strength of its original. So we recommend 1 cup of ingredients, usually in 5 gallons of water. But if you're doing it through one of those hose end sprayers, which I just love, then you'll need to make that same amount of ingredients, 1 cup of our exotic blend, it's half a cup each of base and boost, but it's effectively 1 cup of total ingredients. You'll need to do that in a 2-gallon, smaller amount, and you'll create a microbial broth, a soil soup, an extract at that point, a really rich, thick compost tea. You'll still need to pummel it with oxygen. You still should not be cheap. Don't cheap out on the air pump, even when you're doing it just down to 2 gallons. If you're going for that potency to then subsequently dilute it and spread it all across a big area through the shower mode at 8 ounces a gallon on one of those hose end sprays, you still should use a big air pump to really give you that infusion, that reaction with the air, the good microbes, the aerobic, the air-loving microbes. They're the ones you're favoring. Those are the healthy microbes. Anaerobic equals death in the soil. Aerobic equals life, all right? Oxygen creates life. Now, there are situations where anaerobic, like I was saying in the beginning of the conversation, an anaerobic extract can work. If you keep going long enough anaerobically, the bad guys finally get consumed by one final dominator species. And that's the theory and practice of bokashi. You've probably heard of bokashi, and a lot of preppers are smart and they do make their own bokashi. And that's the opposite of compost tea, but with the results finally ending up being just as good, because you're breeding dominator soil warrior species, not young, broader spectrum microbial there's thousands of different life forms, different species, and there's billions of them in a good compost tea. But in a bokashi, or in an anaerobic compost tea, which has been allowed to ferment long past its ammonia smelling stage, then there's just a few dominator species left, but they will go to work for you and be your soil warriors, so you don't have to be a worrier. So you can get on with being a prepper.
We have been speaking with Josh Cunnings. He is the co-founder, together with his wife Leah, of boogiebrew.net and boogiebrew.com, and a proponent and an evangelist for very innovative and yet traditional ways of reinforcing your growing success by using aerobic tea brewing with compost and cultures that he's recommended. If you'd like more information, he's recommended going to boogiebrew.net or boogiebrew.com. Josh, we just tremendously thank you for joining us on Reluctant Preppers and sharing your entertaining and lighthearted wisdom with us. It's just been a real treat.
Oh, it's my pleasure to join you, and hats off to the preppers of the world. You are the future of this country, and I care a whole lot more about that than making another boogie buck off of you, all right? I'm a typical small business guy. I suffer a disease called orderitis. I can't keep up with the orders. And the more sales we do, guess what? The less money I have to show for it the next month. And that's typical of anyone who's trying to sell an honest product and run a small business in America today. So it's a far greater cause to me is being in touch with, it's like a commercial conduit talking with, as you can tell, I love an audience a bit too much. There's 3 reasons Boogie Brew is not a bigger business. BBC, bicycling. I'm one of those selfish athlete guys who goes off and rides a bike a lot, right? I like to get in motion. It keeps my head out of co-motion. All right, so bicycling. And then BSing, talking on the phone with my customers. I love you all so much. I love each and every one of you. They all have such a powerful story to tell. From a grandma in Florida who's thrown away her shopping bags and says, I'm done with this supermarket lifestyle, Josh. Where an SUV was standing 6 months ago, there's a brand new raised bed in my driveway instead. All the way to a commercial cannabis grower in Oregon who's, trying to save his community from cancer. We got to grow our food and medicine, just like your wife with her herbal apothecary. Sure. We have to prepare ourselves. And to get us out of this mess, we have to undo everything we've been doing for the last 80 years. And preppers can really guide us down that footpath. Your viewers need to go and watch this movie. I'm sure a lot of you already have. You're familiar with it. And I tell everyone I talk to on YouTube about this, grow, and watch this movie, The End of Suburbia. And then the sequel to it, which is Escape from Suburbia. And it's all about growing and just rebuilding this suburban experiment, which has gone hopelessly awry, and turning it into something remotely sustainable instead. Because that movie, The End of Suburbia, it'll fire up any reluctant prepper into a zealous prepper. Because the chief LA Times film review critic in 2004, when that movie came out, and you can find it for free on YouTube. I know there's a couple of places. I think we have it on our Boogie Videos page, The End of Suburbia, right? Nothing will keep your prepper juices going and flowing, and just keep that zeal and motivation alive more than watching this movie, The End of Suburbia. And the chief LA Times film review critic, he says, this is worse than any horror movie, including The Exorcist, like all the classic horror movies that keep you awake at night. This is infinitely worse. Because this is real,
right?
It's true, and it's happening now, and 99% of us are in denial about it. So the reluctant preppers, the zealous preppers, the not so reluctant, all of you, please keep doing what you're doing. I really don't care if you visit my website or not and learn more about compost teas. I really don't. I care so much more about what you're doing, and keep doing it and spreading the word. It's the only hope we've got left as a society.
Well, Josh, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your wholehearted sharing with us today, and we're just delighted that you joined us this first time on Reluctant Preppers. I have the feeling it will not be the last. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime. I love an audience, as you know, so anytime you want to Skype me like this, you made it very easy for me, Dunagun. Thank you. You're super welcome.
Take care.